And yes, you have reached the 10th chapter of Coleman On Purpose. I know it seems like, oh, this is not like a big accomplishment, but for me, it is, especially with a podcast and me doing it by myself. It has caused me to be consistent. I made a goal for myself to release 2 chapters per month, and I've done that consistently since April. And I'm very proud of myself because they always say that podcasts sometimes can't last beyond 10 chapters because you can't keep going. I was listening to someone talk about this recently, and so I'm very, very excited and happy that I've been able to, remain consistent, even though sometimes I didn't feel like just doing it. But I know it's for a purpose. That's why I named the podcast what it is, Coleman On Purpose, because it does have a purpose. And no matter how much I overthink it or, think about, oh, this is that and that is that, and just trying to make excuses for why, I don't feel like it's the best it can be. It's always very encouraging to get those very few people that will reach out sometimes and say, oh, I listened to your podcast. Oh, I really enjoyed that. Oh, yeah, I'm going to check that out. It makes a whole lot of difference for me. So I thank you all that have been consistently listening to the podcast and maybe even spreading the word so someone else can listen. I'm really excited, and I'll tell you after we're done with this segment today why I'm so excited about what's to come with this podcast. But we are going to get into today's chapter, and it is called Let's Talk About Sex. And it's exactly what it says. Let's talk about sex. And though I may not have gone as in depth as I wanted to, which I plan on doing because I'm going to have a guest come on with here with me within the next few months to kind of recap what we were talking about and maybe get a little bit more into depth. But this episode, I really wanted to kind of go in. So I did make this one explicit because I'm talking about some things I don't really go that deep in. So, but I just wanted to make sure, like, if any children or anything is listening to it, this is not the episode for them. This kind of is still about my journey through life with the topic of sex, but it gets into a little bit more depth of, why I am the way I am when it comes to that subject. I hope you got your listening ears ready because we're about to get into some things. Here's Let's Talk About Sex. All right, it is time for my truth. And we have finally come to this, my truth, which I have been pushing back. I kept pushing it back. This was supposed to be the fifth chapter. And we're already on 10. So this episode, I'm my face right now is just let's get this done. This is my Let's Talk About Sex, my truth. And even when I say sex, I don't know why it is so awkward for me to talk about it out loud. It's always been something very secretive for me. It's nothing that's just been out there. So before I even begin this, my truth, here is my disclaimer. So if you are a family member, if you are a youngin', this is my experience. Family members, if you don't want to know the deal with sex life back in the day or whatever, I suggest tune out for this episode and come back on chapter 11. If you're a youngin', you're too young for this, let's exit out of here and let's continue. But this is my experience. I want to push the boundaries of my shyness and begin to explore outside of what has always been kind of taboo in my community, and not even my community, just in the faith, in my faith, in who I am and what I am. And so I'm breaking down these barriers or these walls so that I can move past and get away from any type of insecurity that I have on certain things where, no, it's not taboo. No, you don't have to be quiet. And yes, this is something that's helping me through, therapy and different things like this, because this is a huge part of it. And I'm going to explain why in here. Because I am somewhat innocent when it comes to the matters of sex in general. It's something that I don't discuss in public. You just don't. It's something you secretively do. You don't discuss it. And I came across a page of a pastor He's kind of, I don't know if he's in hot water right now, but Mike Todd had a whole series on sex. And although, there were some things in there that I was like, okay, I don't agree with every single thing in there. There were really good things that you could pull from there. You could pull, the real meat of the sermon. Like my pastor says, eat the meat and spit out the bones. And I was glad that he kind of broke that barrier, because even though we had talked about sex in youth group and church and different things like that, it wasn't as in depth as how he put it. But in this day and age we live in, it's so much different now. I'm glad that he was actually able to touch on it. So I basically know little things here and there. I've never sat down. I never took a sex ed class in school at all, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. So anything that I've learned has come from experience. I had a very protective cover around me as a child, which rightfully so. That's what my parents knew how to do, and they did it. And I'm still who I am today, and I'm grateful for that. But there was a shield that was there. And so I'm going to tell you a quick story. When I was in the second grade, and I've told this story before in one of my past projects, I did not take sex education in school. I was in the second grade. I can remember it to this day. It was something that my parents or my father at the time did not feel like I was ready to talk about that stuff in the second grade. It was too early. So I remember them sending consent forms home from the school. It was a Christian school, a central Christian school. So I'm sure they weren't going to go into anything crazy at the time, but my father did not sign that thing. He was like, no, the school is not teaching my child about, sex and the things of it. And I was the only person in the class that had to sit outside in the hallway. They didn't even give me anything productive to do at the school. Let me tell you, they didn't even give me anything productive to do. I had to go and sit in the hallway. I think they gave me a book or something. I had to work on something out. I just had to sit out there while they were all watching the videos on sex and the man's body part, the woman's body part, all of those different things that were placed within there as a child, just to know, so why is my body different? All of those different things that you would think of, they probably talked about in there. I can remember trying to peek my head in or see a little bit of something, or, and one time, man, things come back to my memory as I'm talking about it. I remember they were getting ready to start because it was a week-long thing, and they were getting ready to start the video, and my teacher at the time remembered that I didn't have a consent form, so I had to actually stop the video. So embarrassing. Stop the video and then say, David, you're not able to be in here, so you need to go outside. It was so... Think about those things that you think about still back then. So my understanding of sex has all come through my experience. And although I'm very thankful for my upbringing and some of the warnings of what sex was, a lot of that came from the church. I'm still very thankful for it, because, even though I had a lot of fears and different things about it, there were some useful things, and it caused me to do my research or just go and try to find out some things for myself on a computer or do whatever I could to know. And I can remember speaking with one of my friends recently, and basically he knew a little bit. He was able to take sex ed and do all of that, but in his family, it was basically the mother told him, don't have sex and don't bring home no kids. That's it. That's all it was. That's all that it required. And many people, I don't know about the sex education story, if your parents let you take sex ed or took you out of the class, but many people I'm not just going to say the black community, but many people just tell their kids that, and that's it. That's all, that you just don't bring home no kids and don't have sex. That's it. That's all you're going to get. And those things actually make teenagers curious. I feel like a teenager is going to find loopholes of how you can come close to having sex without having intercourse. We're going to find ways around it in order to participate or be a part of it. To this day, I think there are certain things that I think aren't sex, which really are sex. And some of my friends had to wake me up to the fact. I remember you just talking about oral sex, and I was like, well, oral sex don't really count as sex. I mean, it's in the name, oral sex. So oral sex is sex. There's no difference, just because you're using a different body part to perform a function, it is still sex. And so when I think about how my mind thinks and wraps its head around it, I just kind of put it in the box of, if you can't get anything from it, or if it can't cause you danger, then it's not sex. If you can't get pregnant by it, if you can't, that's how my mind was calculating what sex was. So it just tells you about kind of how the mind, thinks sometimes. And one other thing that makes my experience different than a lot of others, I was exposed to actual sex at an early age. I want to leave the core of that story for a later chapter, but just know that I was exposed to things, sexual acts at the early age of 7. At the early age of 7, I was exposed to, sexual acts or different things like that, by someone who was more mature or older than me. Whether I still blame myself for all of those events, I'm still kind of sorting that part out. I really don't know. I really still can't tell you. I don't think I blame myself, but I still feel like I could have done something. You know what I'm saying? And I think you get the kind of gist of where that story is going, but that's a whole nother chapter that you just really got to break down. I just wanted to kind of keep it on that topic of, talking about sex in general. The craziest part is many times what adults think they're shielding their children from eventually is going to be exposed to them. And when they do, what they do with that is up to, the parents' guidance, basically. So even if it's exposed, what are the parents going to do after they've been exposed to that? If the person even talks about it or even says that they were exposed. A lot of times it's been so hush hush that if you run into a sexual situation, you don't even want to go back and talk to your parents about it because you're too scared of what the consequences was going to be. That's kind of how a lot of our generation, or maybe generations before, grew up. So when the guidance of the parents is sort of surfacey or taboo and doesn't really get to the core of what sex is and what it means and the value of it, it doesn't give the child some of the tools they need to cope with the seriousness of the connections and with the romantic and the physical side of love. It doesn't give them a chance to do that. So recently, one of my best friends in high school, he did a podcast. I'm not biased. I'm going to say the name of the podcast. It was called The Three-Sided Story. It's called Three-Sided Story. And he goes into some of his experiences on learning to talk about sex and what sex was to him in his experience. And I really do hope to get him on here as the guest. I've already asked him. He said he would. I want to know if he's going to do the follow-up episode to this chapter because I think it would be a really good time. He's a whole mood. So I really would love to get him on here to talk about maybe a little bit about that episode and then just the aspects of how we learned, because he has an experience, and I still remember our experience of being two church boys discussing experiences with like just sex, general things, something that was really frowned upon. Like sex was not, it's not invited into the church. Okay. That's not, that's for married people. That's it, and they just made it seem like it was dangerous unless you were married. And I know that is a biblical base. That is biblically, that is the truth. Whatever, biblically, as teenagers, you're not supposed to be having sex until you are married or there's a commitment or something like that. Like there is supposed to be that. But at the time, I feel like unless you have stuff under lock and key, us as teenagers are going to try to find another way to do it without being caught, like I was saying earlier, just to act a little bit more grown or more adult. We spend all of our adolescent lives doing the best we can to grow up so fast, and sometimes the awakening does come early, and someone gets pregnant and they have to raise the child or become the person everyone knows sleeps around, and you are basically then cast into, you're the one that everyone goes to for a good time to try sex out. I mean, you call that what you want. And those have lasting effects on you as you do reach adulthood. My experience with sex was a lot different than a lot of other people's, as I was saying earlier. Even later on, after all of that stuff happened at 7, when I got to high school, I took a much different approach to what sex was. And I will definitely, trust me, once I'm able or ready to talk about a lot more in-depth things on my different path that I chose in high school, I'll get to that. But I want to just focus on what the generation has become, or how they've become so far removed from the old ways of thinking of sex. It's changed drastically. So I don't want to veer too far off onto an entirely different topic. Just know that my path was way different than, there might have been a few people that were on the same path as me in high school, but mine was different than what everybody else was doing. And that's always how I've been. Like, anybody that knows me, I march to the beat of my own drum, and I've always been like that, and nobody's gonna stop me from doing that. You know, it might have been delayed or something might have happened, but I'm always going to march to the beat of my own drum, and that's just me. That's who I am. So basically, the things that we were warned about with sex, some ended up doing. Some chose the marriage and kids route, some chose the kids route with no marriage, and some chose no kids but keep somebody around to satisfy my needs when I need it. And I believe that's how a lot of our some of our generation and the new generation, they function quite like that now. It's like half of the generation now doesn't even want to have kids. They don't even want children. They just want to better themselves and get, some type of satisfaction when they can. So as I'm watching this new generation grow up, many don't even value sex, and they just look at it, like I said, as a moment of satisfaction, and that is it. But little do they know, and this just comes from experience and even things that our parents taught us, because I will always stand by, you can still learn things from older generations, even though they might not have done everything all the way correctly, or some of the things that they did were passed down from their ancestor, and all of those things. There are still things that you can learn, and they weren't lying with every single thing they told you. Everything that they taught you was not a lie. It's just some things were overly done, and that's all that they knew how to do. So I still feel like, even though, you do have that you think you don't have an attachment when it comes to sex, you do. You don't have it all under control. What comes along with sex and what does not. That many people try to play it off like, oh, this doesn't really affect me, and I can just do sex and I don't have any type of feeling. And some may be numb to it. I just have put myself in a place where I've never wanted to be like that. I think sex is a very powerful thing. It'll make you do some wild things, but it's all in how you manage it. I've said previously, I'm not the spokesperson for treating your body like a temple when it comes to sex, because I've not always done that. I've not always treated myself with the utmost. I look at sex as a valuable thing. But the older I get, the more I know the importance of treasuring what a beautiful gift sex really is in general. Our world is very sex driven. Everything, everywhere we look, everywhere we see, there's sex all around. But I am trying to get to the place where it does not drive my decision making and my mindset, because I feel like that's when it becomes unhealthy. And I believe many people have learned unhealthy habits when it comes to sex, and that's just from either what we've learned, what we've seen, what we've been exposed to, just how we move. We've learned things that are unhealthy, or we've been taught that they're unhealthy, but they really aren't. So there's all of these different ways that we can look at it. And I was recently looking at an internet podcast where they were basically talking about this, and just how we grow and how we move with sex, and why it's so different, and how everyone has their own thing that they either enjoy or like about sex. And if something doesn't feel right, don't do it. You know what I'm saying? There is a good feeling that should come from sex. It should not be anything that hurts. Well, hold on. Let me not go too far off on that ledge, because from experience and learning some things, I know that some people are into sex hurting. And I mean, hey, if that's you, do you. But to me, sex is not supposed to hurt. It's supposed to be a good feeling. That's my preference. Okay, that's just me. And I believe sex is definitely a God-created out-of-body experience. And I've always said I never want to be numb to its power. And so I've tried my best to limit who and what I allow in that space, that sexual space, or that closeness space, or that intimate space. And of course, my ultimate goal is once to come out of my season of singleness. I've run here and there sometimes because of feeling like I needed to have someone to comfort, or to be there, or to give me that love, or that passion, or sex. I've looked for that sometimes, but in this moment of singleness of where I am right now, and while I'm recording this, I'm learning that I'm going to find the correct person that matches that energy, both mentally, spiritually, physically, and can definitely understand me sharing my gift of love with them, and them basically just understanding even everything that I've talked about today, where I come from when it comes to sex, because of the history and how I've learned it. And that's why I connect more with people who actually get it, that know where I've come from, that can relate with some of the same types of things. That is where I find my strongest connection, because they actually understand and get where I come from, and it makes for an even more intimate connection when it comes to sex in general. So I'm trying to break out from that inherited, I call it inherited because we've inherited it and it's been taught to us, that inherited awkward fear of everything sex entails. And now I'm learning to see sex in the glorious form that it was created. And that is my truth on sex. That completes chapter 10 of Let's Talk About Sex. And I'm glad you got a chance to hear and listen. Like I said, there were certain parts in there which I didn't want to delve too far into a whole nother story, but I do hope to in the future be able to tell more of that, because like 4 years ago I always talk about that project, Differently Created Black Boy Man, where I was able to actually talk about sexuality. Now I take it a little step further with talking about sex and how I look at it, and then I'll be able to go into more of some of the things that I went through that process that happened directly within the church. So I really do hope you like that chapter. What I am excited the most about, though, is I am getting ready to venture into a new part of Coleman On Purpose. The first 10 chapters have kind of been about my journey, my process, which it'll still talk about portions of my journey, but you're going to be getting everything more in real time. As you notice, a lot of my truths are pre-recorded. So my truth was actually recorded in May of 2022. It's now September. So as you can see, it's a little gap in between there where I recorded that up till now. And as I say, we are ever changing, ever evolving people. So sometimes I might say something 4 years ago that might be totally different than what I thought back years ago. And it can change month to month. It could have been a totally different feeling that I had from May up until now. So I look forward to having these basically me recording my podcast in real time. So the background music and all of that stuff, I don't know if I'm still want to include it or if I'm going to be able to, but I do want to continue pushing forward with Coleman On Purpose, and I can't wait to do more of these episodes. There's a lot of cool topics coming up. I can't wait to bring on some more guests. I've been in talks with some people recently about coming on, so I'm going to make sure I get those done so that I can have some interaction on here also with people that might have a little bit of different thinking than me and might have a different perspective and may be able to reach a little bit further, because everything I do on this podcast is for a purpose and on purpose. So some things I might say may not reach the everyday person. It might need another voice in there to kind of echo in, or maybe to connect with what I'm going to be talking about on these future episodes. So get ready for more of Coleman On Purpose. I'm so happy that I reached this 10th podcast. It really feels good to have something that I did on my own that is very consistent. Although like my differently created Black Boy Man was only like 13 or 12 or 13 episodes, I now have something that I can strive to go further than that and have more to talk about, because I have so much to say, and I really want to make sure that there is a reasoning behind everything that I talk about or cover on this podcast. So I hope you continue tuning in with me. Make sure you go and follow me on Instagram at DeluxeDave, DeluxeDave. I'm also on TikTok at David J. Coleman. So it's David J with a dot and then Coleman, or period, David J. Coleman. And you can follow me on TikTok also. I will see you next time on Coleman On Purpose. Remember, you are unique, you are loved, and you are created for greatness. I'll see you back here for chapter 11.